The new top lawyer Trump has just moved to install at the General Services Administration, the GSA. GSA is in charge of federal real estate. This usually is not a very high-profile agency. But in this administration, we've got the president literally bulldozing the White House and dumping the debris randomly on public golf courses. So all of a sudden, this previously low-profile agency is right at the heart of Trump weirdness and destruction. Trump has reportedly now found a perfect candidate to be a new top lawyer at the GSA. He is reportedly installing there a guy whose nomination for a different job had to be pulled a couple of weeks ago when it emerged that he had said about himself, quote, "I do have a Nazi streak in me." Well, now Mr. Nazi Streak will be a senior official in charge of federal buildings and federal real estate.
Okay, so this is insane, and we need to talk about it right now because what just went down with Pam Bondi is absolutely unprecedented in modern American legal history, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. We're talking about a sitting attorney general caught on actual security footage removing documents from a courthouse immediately after a judge ordered those exact documents to be produced for investigation. We have video evidence of this happening in real time. And the legal community is absolutely losing their minds right now because this isn't some minor procedural violation or technicality we're arguing about here. This is potentially evidence tampering and obstruction of justice caught on camera by someone who's supposed to be the top law enforcement officer in the entire country. And the implications of this are genuinely staggering when you think about it for even a second. I mean, we're watching something unfold that could fundamentally change how we think about accountability for high-level government officials and whether anyone is truly above the law in this country. And that's not hyperbole, that's just the reality of what we're dealing with right now. But before we go any further, real quick, let's be honest. You can't really trust mainstream media anymore. That's why we built Pump Politics, to bring you real stories, real context, and no corporate spin. If you want to stay ahead of the headlines, join our free newsletter. We'll send the news straight to your inbox every day. Just click the link in the description to join. And if you just want to support what we're doing, join us, be part of the community that actually cares about the truth. All right, let's get back to the video.
He announced that there is going to be a new investigation that is now going to be run out of the SDNY, the same people who prosecuted Epstein and Maxwell. This new investigation where all arrows point to Democrats. And that's very convenient for Donald Trump because once there is a new investigation, that gives DOJ a reason to say, well, we're going to hold some things back. You actually can't get everything because there's this ongoing investigation, and putting everything out there would jeopardize the integrity of this investigation. Of course, it's not really an investigation. It's a political hit job, just disguised as an investigation to provide him with an excuse so that his DOJ can go into court and not necessarily produce anything that may be damaging to Donald Trump. That's all this is.
The timeline here is what makes this so damning and why legal experts are calling this a potential career-ending scandal that could result in criminal charges. And I want you to really understand the sequence of events because it matters so much. On November 13th through 15th of 2025, we watched this whole thing unfold in real time as Bondi was literally observed removing sensitive documents from the courthouse just minutes after a bombshell judicial order came down, demanding the production of those exact materials for active investigation and oversight purposes. Court filings and security footage confirmed that Bondi and her aides rushed out with boxes and files in what can only be described as a panicked scramble, and they were directly defying the judge's ruling in the most blatant way possible. The courtroom apparently erupted when this happened because legal staff and witnesses and members of the press saw the action happening right in front of them and immediately alerted the presiding judge about what was going down. And honestly, I can't even imagine the chaos that must have ensued in that moment when everyone realized what they were witnessing happened right before their eyes. Now, here's where it gets even more wild because the judge didn't just let this slide or schedule some hearing for 3 months from now like you might expect in a typical court proceeding. No. The judge issued what's being called a rapid compliance order, essentially summoning Bondi back to court immediately for a hearing on contempt charges, and the language in this order was absolutely unambiguous. The order explicitly stated that Bondi was required to return to court and bring all documents taken and provide a full accounting of her actions, or else face an immediate arrest order for obstruction of justice. And when I say immediate, I mean the judge made it crystal clear that this wasn't a suggestion or a request or something that could be negotiated or delayed. Legal experts who have been following this case are calling the move unprecedented for an attorney general position, and they're warning that video evidence combined with eyewitness testimony of post-order document removal constitutes clear grounds for serious felonies and long-term disbarment proceedings that could end her legal career permanently and possibly result in significant prison time if prosecutors decide to pursue this aggressively. And it's not just the courts that are getting involved here, because Congress and the Department of Justice have initiated parallel investigations into this incident, and they're demanding Bondi's full cooperation with the investigative process. They've issued warnings that systematic evidence tampering at the highest levels of government will result in swift criminal prosecution, and they're making it very clear that nobody is above the law here, no matter how powerful their position might be or what connections they have in Washington. So yeah, we're watching a potential criminal case unfold against a sitting attorney general in real time. And the ramifications of this are going to be felt throughout the entire legal system for years to come. And that's what we need to break down today, because this story is absolutely massive and it's not getting the attention it deserves from mainstream media outlets right now. All right, so let's dig into exactly what happened here and why this is such a big deal from a legal standpoint, because I think some people might be hearing about this and thinking, okay, she took some documents. What's the huge issue here and why is everyone freaking out about it? Well, the huge issue is that timing is everything in law, and the specific sequence of events in this case is what transforms this from a potential misunderstanding into what legal experts are calling textbook obstruction of justice and possible evidence tampering, when you have security footage and court records from November 13th through 15th showing Bondi and her aides removing boxes of documents just after a judge issued a bombshell order requiring those documents to be produced. Then you've got a problem. A really, really big problem that could result in felony charges and serious prison time and the complete destruction of someone's legal career and professional reputation, because this isn't the kind of thing you come back from in the legal profession. The security footage aspect of this cannot be overstated in terms of its importance to building a criminal case here. And I want to emphasize this point because it's absolutely critical. We're not talking about allegations or he said, she said situations where credibility becomes an issue and prosecutors have to convince a jury about whose version of events is more believable. We have actual video evidence showing the document removal happening in real time, which eliminates virtually all ambiguity about what occurred and when it occurred and who was involved in the removal process. One legal analyst put it perfectly when they said that video of post-order document removal eliminates all ambiguity and constitutes classic obstruction where immediate arrest is justified and DOJ disbarment becomes a virtual certainty. That's not hyperbole or political spin either, because when you look at the federal statutes governing obstruction of justice, the elements of the crime are pretty straightforward, and this situation appears to check every single box on the list of what prosecutors need to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. Now let's talk about what the judge did in response, because this is where you really see how serious the courts are treating this situation and how unprecedented the judicial response has been. The judge ruled that Bondi must appear for an immediate hearing and surrender any removed evidence and justify her actions or face arrest for obstruction of justice. That's not a normal response to a document production dispute or some kind of routine discovery issue that comes up in civil litigation all the time. That's the response you see when a judge believes there's been a flagrant violation of a court order and potential criminal activity happening right under their nose in their own courthouse. The use of the word immediate in the court order is significant too, because it shows the judge isn't interested in delays or procedural games or the usual legal maneuvering that happens in high-profile cases. They want answers and they want them now, and they're willing to use the full force of their authority to get those answers and ensure compliance with court orders. The legal standards for contempt of court and obstruction of justice are well established, and they're not particularly complicated when you break them down to their basic elements. For contempt, you generally need to show that there was a clear court order, that the person understood the order, and that they willfully violated it, knowing full well what they were doing. For obstruction, you need to show that someone knowingly and intentionally interfered with an official proceeding or investigation by destroying, concealing, or altering documents or evidence with the intent to impede the administration of justice. When you look at what allegedly happened here with Bondi removing documents immediately after a judicial order demanding their production, then both of those legal standards appear to be met pretty clearly and convincingly. The timing alone is incredibly damning because it suggests consciousness of guilt and a deliberate attempt to prevent the court from accessing materials that were specifically ordered to be produced for investigative purposes. Congressional and DOJ reviews are citing Bondi's conduct as what they're calling a major turning point that demands full accountability and new reforms and likely federal prosecution. And this isn't just partisan rhetoric. Multiple congressional committees have announced their opening investigations, and they're requesting all documentation related to the incident, including the security footage and witness statements and any internal communications from Bondi's office about the document removal and what instructions, if any, were given to staff members. The DOJ's Office of Professional Responsibility has also reportedly launched a review, which is significant because that's the office that investigates potential misconduct by department attorneys, and they have the authority to recommend disciplinary action, including disbarment from practicing law. So Bondi is potentially facing legal consequences from multiple directions here, including criminal prosecution, civil contempt proceedings, and professional discipline from the Bar Association. And any one of those outcomes could be career-ending, but all three happening simultaneously would be absolutely devastating. What makes this situation even more complicated is the nature of the documents themselves, because we're apparently talking about materials related to active investigations and oversight proceedings that have significant legal and political implications. That means these aren't just random files or personal correspondence we're discussing here that might have minimal relevance to anything important. These are official records that have relevance to ongoing legal matters, and the court has determined they need to be examined as part of judicial oversight and potentially as evidence in other proceedings. When an attorney general removes such documents in defiance of a court order, then you're not just looking at a personal legal problem for that individual that can be resolved through private negotiations. You're looking at a potential constitutional crisis where the executive branch is actively interfering with judicial authority, and that's the kind of thing that threatens the entire system of checks and balances our government is built upon. The legal community's response has been swift and overwhelmingly critical of Bondi's alleged conduct, with lawyers from across the political spectrum expressing shock and dismay. Legal scholars who specialize in government ethics and criminal law have been remarkably united in their assessment that what happened here crosses major legal and ethical lines that cannot be ignored or minimized. One prominent legal analyst characterized the situation as classic obstruction, where immediate arrest is justified. And that kind of language from experienced legal professionals tells you everything you need to know about how serious this is. These aren't partisan hacks trying to score political points. These are people who've spent decades studying and practicing law, and they're saying that what we're seeing here is potentially criminal conduct that demands aggressive prosecution. So let's break down what happens next and what the potential consequences are, because I think that's what everyone wants to know at this point. And it's important to understand the various pathways this case could take. The immediate question is whether Bondi will comply with the judge's order to return to court and surrender the documents and provide a full accounting of what happened and why. If she does comply, then we're looking at a contempt hearing where the judge will determine whether her actions constituted a willful violation of a court order and what sanctions are appropriate. If she doesn't comply, then the judge has already made clear that an arrest order will be issued. And at that point, you're talking about a sitting attorney general potentially being taken into custody by federal marshals, which would be an absolutely unprecedented spectacle in American legal history. The contempt proceedings themselves could result in a range of sanctions depending on what the judge determines is appropriate given the severity of the violation and whether it appears to have been intentional or reckless. Civil contempt sanctions could include fines that accumulate daily until compliance is achieved, which is designed to coerce cooperation rather than punish past conduct. Criminal contempt sanctions could include jail time, which is designed to punish the violation and vindicate the court's authority, and send a message that defying court orders will not be tolerated regardless of who you are. Given the high-profile nature of this case and the clear video evidence of the violation, it seems likely that the judge will impose significant sanctions to make an example and reinforce the principle that nobody is above the law, even if they hold the highest law enforcement position in the country. Beyond the contempt proceedings, there's the very real possibility of criminal prosecution for obstruction of justice, which carries much more serious penalties, including potential prison time. Federal obstruction statutes provide for sentences of up to 20 years, depending on the specific charge and the circumstances of the case and the defendant's criminal history. Now, realistically, Bondi would probably be looking at a much shorter sentence if convicted, given that she has no prior criminal record and would likely be eligible for various sentencing reductions, but even a few months in federal prison would be absolutely devastating for someone in her position and would effectively end any possibility of continuing in public service or legal practice. The prosecution would need to prove that she acted knowingly and intentionally to obstruct an official proceeding, but with video evidence and witness testimony and the clear timeline of events, that burden of proof seems very manageable. The disbarment proceedings are another major consequence that Bondi is facing, and in some ways these might be even more significant than the criminal charges in terms of long-term impact. Being disbarred means you can no longer practice law, which for someone who's built their entire career around legal work is essentially a professional death sentence. The Bar Association takes attorney misconduct extremely seriously, especially when it involves obstruction of justice or evidence tampering, because these are actions that strike at the very heart of the legal system's integrity. Lawyers are officers of the court, and they have special ethical obligations that go beyond what's required of ordinary citizens, and when those obligations are violated in such a blatant way, the bar typically responds with severe discipline. Given the video evidence and the judicial findings that would likely come out of the contempt proceedings, it's hard to see how Bondi avoids disbarment if the facts are as they appear to be. The political ramifications of this scandal are also worth considering because they extend far beyond Bondi's individual legal troubles and could affect the entire administration. Having your attorney general face criminal charges and potential arrest is not a good look for any president, and it raises serious questions about judgment and vetting processes and whether proper due diligence was done before appointing someone to such a critical position. Congress is already launching investigations, and you can bet that opposition politicians are going to use this as ammunition to attack the administration's credibility and competence. There will likely be calls for resignation or removal. And even if Bondi somehow avoids criminal conviction, her effectiveness as Attorney General is probably already compromised beyond repair, because how can you enforce the law when you're accused of breaking it yourself in such a spectacular fashion? The broader implications for government accountability and the rule of law are perhaps the most important aspect of this entire situation and the reason why this story matters so much. For years, we've watched powerful people seem to operate under different rules than everyone else, with violations that would send ordinary citizens to prison, resulting in nothing more than stern letters or fines that amount to pocket change for wealthy individuals. The public has grown increasingly cynical about whether justice can truly be blind and whether anyone in power will ever face real consequences for their actions. This case has the potential to push back against that cynicism and demonstrate that the system can work when judges are willing to act decisively and when there's clear evidence of wrongdoing that can't be explained away or minimized through clever legal arguments. The judge's emergency courtroom order in response to Bondi's alleged tampering has shattered any remaining shield of impunity and launched a case that could reshape DOJ standards and high-level prosecution for years to come. We're seeing in real time what it looks like when the judiciary asserts its authority and refuses to be intimidated by the power or position of the person who's violated a court order. This sets a precedent that other judges can point to when they're faced with similar situations, and it sends a message to government officials at all levels that court orders must be taken seriously and compliance is not optional or negotiable. That's a critically important message in an era where we've seen increasing disregard for institutional norms and legal constraints on executive power. So, where does this leave us as we watch this case continue to develop and move through the legal system over the coming weeks and months? We're in a situation where multiple investigative and prosecutorial bodies are moving simultaneously toward what could be historic accountability for a sitting attorney general. The video evidence and witness testimony appear to be overwhelming, and the judicial response has been swift and uncompromising. The legal standards for contempt and obstruction seem clearly met based on the facts as we understand them, and the political pressure is mounting from multiple directions, including Congress and legal ethics groups, and even some members of Bondi's own party who recognize that defending this conduct is indefensible. It's hard to see a scenario where Bondi emerges from this without serious legal and professional consequences unless there's some major exculpatory evidence that hasn't come to light yet. And honestly, given how quickly the judge moved to issue the compliance order and threaten arrest, it seems unlikely that such evidence exists because judges don't typically take such aggressive action unless they're very confident in the strength of their position. This is the kind of legal drama that could define an entire administration and reshape our understanding of accountability at the highest levels of government. And we need to be paying very close attention to how it unfolds because the precedents set here will matter for decades to come.